thank you so much, Harriet, for joining me. It's such a pleasure to have you here. So excited to talk about your brand new book, which again is finally out in the world, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, well, 25th of May is out.
Oh,
So I guess I don't know when this is going out, but yeah, hopefully it'll be out. One of my friends has already sent a photo of a book that's arrived in her post, so I know it's
ah,
starting to trickle out into the world.
way, that's amazing. So congratulations for
Thank
getting
you.
that far. So well done. And without further ado, of course, I'll just do a brief introduction and then we'll get straight into it. So, former Guardian culture writer Harriet Gibson began her career as a runner for MTV before becoming a music journalist in the 2000s, writing for publications such as Q, Enemy, Time Out, and Nylon. She actually spent 8 years as a Guardian staff writer and editor, and now has a column for the Weekend magazine. Is that correct? And your
Yeah.
memoir, Is This Okay, was going to be published this year, so very soon. So I'm like, the first thing that came into my mind is like, oh my God, is being online a form of modern day voyeurism or escapism?
Oh, that's a lovely question. That is a lovely question. I would say it started out as voyeurism, very much so with me. You know, it started out with access to all these people that I'd never been able to speak to, older boys primarily. And I could watch their movements online and I could see all these exotic women that I'd never seen before. And as someone who's always really loved watching people, always been really interested in finding out what it's like to be someone else, the internet sucked me in so much because of that. But I would say social media has evolved so much over the last few decades. And now I would say, I don't want to speak on behalf of every single human being on planet Earth, but I think a lot of us are numbing ourselves with the internet. Therefore, escapism is really integral to how we use the internet now. I think it's less about seeing reality. And like, I really loved early internet because you felt like you were kind of peeking in and you'd see things that you weren't necessarily meant to see. A photo that a friend had tagged someone in, and you thought, oh, that's great. I've never seen that side profile of that girl before.
Mhm.
Whereas now everything is so curated, it's so designed to make you buy stuff, to buy into different human beings who are personalities who make money out of advertising, that I think it's lost some of that kind of really juicy voyeuristic thrill, and it is a
Mhm.
lot more about disappearing into sort of daydreams and needing stuff that you don't actually need.
Oh God, I don't. Oh God, I get sucked in as well, so I completely understand. And there's so many like new terminology that keeps coming out from it. And I only discovered the term parasocial relationships this year. Like I was like, what is this? And we've seen an increase, like a massive
Mm.
increase in parasocial relationships. So, like, first of all, obviously, I'm going to ask, like, why do you think this is the case, and like, what do you think this is actually doing to society as a whole?
Well, parasocial relationships have been around since the 1950s when social scientists discovered that people were having these really extreme reactions to television stars or radio personalities because they were inside their homes, and people felt this complete affinity and desire to be close to these human beings they were never going to meet. Um, and these days, it's only accelerated with the fact that you now have access to these people 24 hours a day on social media. And I think parasocial relationships probably had a huge increase over the pandemic for obvious reasons. We were cut off from our friends and our families. And the internet's very good and deceptive. It makes you feel as if you're having this connection with someone, that you're sharing a moment, that you're learning about someone's true being, when actually it's all kind of constructed to make you feel something. There isn't that much genuine connection, I don't think personally,
Mhm.
from these people that we're idolizing on the internet. Um, I think since, well, I mean, I don't know if we're post pandemic, but whatever era we're in now, I still think it's very prevalent. And I think that, as I said earlier, I think it's less about, the internet is less about having these conversations with people and more about idolizing personalities and content creators. There's like a weird hierarchy to the internet now that I'm
Mhm.
seeing. Hang on, let me think. That's a really good question. What was the second half of that question? Was it?
I think, like, what do you think it's doing to society,
Ah,
having these weird kind of relationships that aren't really relationships, you know?
yes, I'm with you. So I think the parasocial relationships are kind of putting a slight distance between human beings in reality. I've got a friend who works at a university, and she said that during Freshers Week or the first week of term,
Mm.
the students are all put in a room, and instead of looking at each other and having kind of those really uncomfortable awkward conversations, they're looking at their phones, they're looking at people on their phones. And so a few months into university, they're getting really depressed because they're lonely, they don't have friends, and that's because they are not interacting with human beings. And I know
Oh
this
God.
seems really cliche, like everyone knows this kind of, the internet is not good, it's not healthy, but I do really feel that it's creating a kind of a fear of actual genuine intimacy and connection. It's a lot easier to get that hit of dopamine from staring at someone than it is to have that kind of often quite awkward moment of revealing yourself to someone,
Mm.
talking to someone. You know, it's not always nice being in a sort of a direct conversation with someone, but you have to do it because you
Mm.
don't get that buzz from staring at people because they're not there, they're not real, and they can disappear at any time.
Oh God, completely agree with you. No, no, it's really strange. Like after, like when we first got out of the sort of the first lockdown and things like that, and actually talking to people again and
Yeah.
figuring out facial cues again and
Yeah.
gestures, I was like, wait, what's going on here? And it just goes to show, isn't it? Even the internet, even a screen like this, like there is something that's like
Mm.
masking something. And yeah, I totally agree. And you've just kind of touched upon what I was going to ask, which is like, you know, these freshers and these young people who are feeling lonely. And are we more lonely and empty as people now generally because of it, do you think?
Goodness. It's hard because I feel like everything in society is extremes in both directions now. So
Mm.
you know, if you consider like a marginalized group, or the fact that someone might have from a tiny village connection to
Mm.
someone who is like them that they wouldn't normally have because no one else in their village is got ADHD or is trans or something,
Yeah.
like, you know, that there are genuine communities online that are beneficial to people that help them from feeling alienated and alone.
Mm.
So on one hand, it's brilliant. Um,
Mm.
and on the other hand, it does put off up, you know, it does create this artificial sense of connection does actually delay genuine connection. But
Mm.
then when I think about past generations, there was so much stoicism and so much toughness and a lack of vulnerability that, you know, there probably was a lot of loneliness in that way of life too. It's just
Yeah.
different now. I feel like we share quite a lot online now, but
Mm.
I don't know if it's to the people that we need to share. It's these
Mm.
human beings on the internet rather than your sister or your friend.
Mm.
Um, yeah, that's a really smart question. I don't know if we're lonelier. I really hope not, because I feel like the pandemic really gave people an opportunity to stop doing the things they should do. So, you know, not this isn't an example, this interview here, but just doing a chat on Zoom rather than a meeting in real life, or
Mm.
giving us an excuse not to see family members, or I don't know, just not go out to restaurants, just all these kind of
Yeah.
brilliant things that it's just easier just to do it on your phone, isn't it?
Yeah, God, it's true. I'm like, you're right. It did create some level of distance, almost like an excuse not to do these things
Mm.
anymore. And it was hard enough, even with all the internet and stuff before the pandemic. And like, just touching upon, like, you know, we grew up in a similar era of like when it first came out, and you know, it was kind of revolutionary and kind of a bit of a like a mind boggle when it first came out. I was like, what is this? You know, dial up modems and all
Yeah.
that. And you can't use your phone at the same time as using the internet. But it's strange. Like, do you think like people like us? Because I had a similar situation where I found messaging groups and all those kind of chat rooms, and I was really kind of like really intrigued by all those things that had first come out. So, do you think we developed a kind of specific kind of relationship with the internet because at the time we were also in like kind of a vulnerable state? You know, being teenagers and things like that.
Oh my goodness, totally. I mean, I don't remember feeling insecure before I had the internet,
Mm.
but then it arrived when I was 15. So that's when you start feeling insecure anyway, because your body and your brain is developing and changing, and you're feeling all these new things, and you're looking different, and you've got spots and stuff.
Yeah, God.
So I can't separate if it was the internet or adolescence that
Mm.
made me into the insecure wreck that I became. But I do think, I'm not a scientist, but it's really dangerous for teenagers on the internet, because those pathways are created during
Mm.
those years, those adolescent years, and addictions that are dangerous at that age as well. I would say when I was a teenager, it was incredibly intoxicating to go on forums and talk to strangers, and I got a real thrill out of it, but it was
Mm.
really naive and quite experimental and ridiculous. And I say this in the book, but my best friend and I would log on and just say really disgusting things about excrement to men that we knew were going to try and say something sexual to us. And it was this exciting thrill to sort of play with these sort of predatory men. I
It's kind
mean,
of
that
funny.
was it was funny. But I've spoken to lots of girls, and they did something similar. It was quite
Yeah.
empowering for a minute. And then MSN arrived, and it created this constant dialogue with people that you were seeing at school most of the time.
Mm.
But I really loved that as well. But it was dangerous because it was such a profound distraction, and a lot of sort of nastiness could be created. And it was the
Mm.
sort of very early days of, a nasty message might have been sent, or you might have,
Yeah.
I don't know, you've been left out of a conversation, like people might have deleted you as a friend. So all that kind of layer of those sort of
Mm.
insidious things that are magnified much more in today's culture. And then, yeah, I think for me, it's just been a huge distraction from doing the things I should be doing. So I've always been really jealous of people who are smarter than me. But if I was on the internet less, then I could read more books. But instead, I just keep staring at fit girls on the internet and not reading books. So is it? Yeah, it's inhibited me as a young person. I would say, like, I feel like I could be a more rounded, intelligent, worthy person had it not been for those early years.
Sorry, I just just got a frog in my throat. No, I totally agree with you because it's true. Because sometimes I think, oh, I feel so sad for young children because I was like, we lived at a time where we didn't have it at all. At one point, we had no phones, none of the internet. And I was like, there was something really glorious about the purity
Yeah.
of it, I have to say. Like, I was a nerd growing up, such a nerd. And I'd started up a Shakespeare club because I was
Oh.
such a nerd. But I really enjoyed it. But it's like at then everyone is just now on their phones and things
Mm.
like that. But the first iteration was things like MySpace, like those platforms. So, would you say those kind of platforms fueled a lot of insecurities and kind of disordered thinking? And do you
Mm.
think like it wouldn't happen as much if we didn't have as easy access to other people?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I think in the 90s, heroin chic was the dominant beauty standard. So, there was already toxicity is always surrounded female bodies particularly, but it was totally accelerated by online culture. You had Perez Hilton's website,
Mm,
who,
yeah.
you know, his sole force in life was humiliating women who had a
Yeah.
stretch mark or a piece of hair out of place. And I'd go on those websites, even though I knew it was wrong, and it would just trickle into, I'd always been a feminist, but it would trickle into my brain. And then you had Hot or Not, which was a website that
Mm.
rated the attractiveness of women. And again, I'd gleefully go on that, knowing that I wasn't on there, and sort of curiously wondered, how would I score? So the wheels were already turning. And then MySpace for me, I think it was, I think it was, it was an unhealthy space because attractive people did prosper. It wasn't
Mm,
necessarily a meritocracy.
yeah.
And I think normally we're used to people in our village, you'd see people who kind of looked like you, and you thought, yeah, I'm doing all right, and suddenly had access to all these other women and men and other people who had way better hair or way
Mm.
better clothes, and you thought, oh God, why have I not got that? You know, and it just became this globalized race to be the most beautiful person on planet Earth, rather than,
Mm.
I don't know, fairly fit for your school year, whatever. Um, and then today I wonder, because I feel like when I go on TikTok, you do see a lot of intelligent people prospering and really funny and strange people.
Mm.
But then again, probably very thin, hot girls also just do very well. So I can't tell if we're doing better or worse than we were in the noughties. But
Mm.
it was, I mean, I don't know about you, but everyone often talks about how horrific the noughties were, just in terms of, you know, these shrinking bodies like Nicole Richie,
Oh yeah.
the Olsen twins, Rachel Zoe, the stylist. It was the size zero era, and
Mm.
my brain couldn't comprehend how they were actually getting that thin, because it wasn't just like they'd done some weight loss. It was, they literally had the skeletons of children.
Yeah. It's,
And
ugh, it's
my
wrong.
brain was just like, how do I do that? You know, it was just constantly trying to figure out, how could I do that? Um, yeah, I'm over that now though. Thank God.
Yeah, I'm like, it's scary. It's scary because we've managed to just get over that, having years and years of like therapy slash, just just like basically having to mature out of it.
Mm,
And it was hard. It was hard. And now young people are going through that with that
yeah.
constantly. And it's just like, oh God, it's awful. And so you really do feel for them. And it's like, but how much of being online is like being in a fantasy, do you think? And
Mm,
why do we get kind of sucked into jealousy with people we've never met or, will probably never meet?
yeah. Um, I feel like I should also mention filters now, which are so clever. Like,
Oh,
I didn't realize
yeah.
everyone does filters. I'm nearly 40, and I genuinely thought everyone looked like they did.
Oh
There's so
God,
much
no.
the trickery that takes place on filters is just magnificent now.
Oh, and the
Um,
AI filters are like a
and
whole
yeah,
other thing, aren't they? Jesus.
absolutely. Jealousy is a really powerful emotion, and it is closely affiliated with eroticism.
Hmm.
So it's a very active sensation, you know. It's showing you that you really want something.
Hmm.
And again, as I said about the beauty, sort of your village, you compare yourself to people in your village. Suddenly you had all of these options, these revolving billboards of types of women that you could be like because of the internet. And it gave us so many options. Um, in terms of, I mean, not just beauty standards, but intelligence as well. Like, there's a chapter in my book about a colleague called Laura who was really big on Twitter when I was a journalist, and
Hmm.
I just
Yeah.
couldn't, I couldn't believe.
I looked into her right after as you wrote it. I was like, who is this?
She's a lovely person, and we're friends now. But that, you know, it totally took me over, this feeling of jealousy, for about 10 years. Um, I wanted to be like her so badly, and I just, as much as I tried to tweet sort of cool things, they just fell on deaf ears. I didn't have the knack to do it.
Hmm.
Um, and what I really wanted was to be a writer, and I just looked at her and thought, I hate you because you've got something that I want, and I should have just been focusing on actually being a better writer instead.
Hmm.
Sorry, what was the rest of that was a really good question. I've forgotten what the first half was.
It's basically like how much of being online is being in a fantasy.
Oh, that's it. Mm.
I was really intrigued by some of the things you wrote, you wrote about because exactly, I've done that before, especially in my previous iteration of job where I was working in sort of slightly more intelligence work. I would, it's a kind of a habit. You would start thinking, oh, I'm trying to find this person. Oh, I can find this person through just this name, and oh, I can find it through this, and you're kind of testing yourself a bit.
Mm.
And it's almost like a game, like you're gamifying it.
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering, like, is this like part of
Oh,
this
yeah.
weird fantasy?
Yeah, that's such a good way of phrasing it. It does feel like this pursuit of like the golden egg.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I'm really brutally honest, the thing that I wanted to find was the thing that I really wanted to find is like what makes them weak. I want to see an ugly photo of them and I want to see a tweet that makes them seem as stupid as I am.
Yeah.
I just wanted this information that made me feel like I wasn't the worst, that we were
Mm.
connected, we were all connected in some way. And it was really exciting being on that pursuit, but a lot of the times I never found that thing that I wanted to find. You
Mm.
know, I could find photos of some girl I was jealous of, but she was still prettier than me or cooler than me and had better clothes. And I'd just leave the whole experience feeling completely deflated. But I am really interested in the idea of fantasies and the internet and how. Have you heard of maladaptive daydreaming?
Hmm. Yeah, dissociation and
Yes,
yeah.
and I think I've spent a lot of time using my phone as a kind of maladaptive daydream device,
Mm.
and almost seeing someone I'm interested in and creating a whole universe around them that doesn't actually exist, and filling in the gaps and being like, oh, I bet she does this, or I bet he lives there, and I bet they do that at the weekend, and just getting completely lost in dialogues that don't exist. And even just sort of people that I know creating these fantasy worlds in which they hate me and fit like filling in gaps because I might have seen a tweet that seemed like it was about me, or, you know, just getting completely absorbed in things that don't exist just to sort of
Mm.
torture myself in a way.
But I
It's
don't
stupid.
think you're the only one. No, but it's the
No.
weirdest thing. I feel like we are all fantasy building now. Like there's even all these franchises of these like Marvel universe or DC or whatnot. They are building. They are kind of
Mm.
creating worlds for people to kind of get distracted. They're not watching deep independent movies as much as before. But it's like we are kind of creating lots and lots of different worlds around us, isn't it? Where we're just shielding ourselves.
Yeah. Oh God, I wish I could remember the name. When I was telling my mum about my book, she'd never heard of parasocial relationships. But I told her about what they are and how we're watching people all the time. And she referenced this sci-fi novel from the 1950s by this Russian author. It's so annoying that I haven't got the name handy to me. My memory is terrible. Um, but that book was written about a parallel universe in which no one talks to each other anymore. We just watch each other through screens. And I
Oh,
thought, God, that's what literally what
literally,
we're doing.
that's what we're doing.
What are we doing? And I found that so scary. I found that so scary because you get so energized by actually having a conversation and watching someone's face. And you don't even, I don't know about you, but when I've spoken to a friend on WhatsApp or on the internet, they might say they're fine, but until you've looked at someone and how they're
Mm,
carrying themselves and the way they're breathing, you don't know how someone really is or what their body's like. You know, if they're, your body can tell you so much about how someone is really doing.
mm.
And so much of that is lost in translation in the digital world.
Oh, completely. Like, we just see like this much of people on these kind of like Zooms and, all the video conferencing. So we have no idea what's happening underneath, or is someone like shaking their leg, their nervousness? Are they fidgeting? I'm always fidgeting with my hands underneath
Oh,
and
yeah.
things, and the
I'm
things.
naked.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
naked.
There you go. So it just goes to show, like, there's so much that we are missing out. We're not getting the full picture, isn't it? With
Hmm.
the internet, and you've mentioned this just now, which is the maladaptive, idea of the dissociative kind of behavior. And so, does being online feel like an out of body experience at times?
Yeah, I've had some really high moments of transcending myself, you know. I think it's just when you like there've been periods of abstinence where I've really tried to stay offline and then I nosedive straight in and I eat up the internet like a hog. And I it's like I'm slack jawed and dribbling because I'm consuming so much of it at such velocity. Um, but I would say, hang on, what did you just say that was good? I would
An
say, oh yeah, go on.
an out of body experience.
Yeah. Can I talk about my experience of disassociation? Is that
Of
interesting?
course,
Okay.
absolutely.
So when I started going through the menopause in my late 20s, and then I had a baby, and the birth was really bad, and I had PTSD. And the years that followed that birth, I started disassociating because my brain couldn't really comprehend the trauma of the birth, but also these huge changes that had happened in my body.
Mm,
And I started disassociating for the first time. I mean, I'd always kind of done it, but it was really severe and for very long periods. And I found that the internet was completely encouraging that sensation.
yeah.
Instead of, if I'd had a period of stress, instead of processing that emotion and feeling the horrible feelings and crying or calling my mum,
Mm,
I would immediately look at my phone
mm,
and get completely numbed by it. And that just prolongs the processing of the trauma. So you're just stacking up all of this trauma and your brain cannot cope with it. And so it just can't compute anymore. So you're just sort of wheeling around like a robot for a few weeks. Um, so yeah, it's an out of body experience, the internet. But then it's also been a provider of like some severe pain and like physical pain. Like I think when I was younger, particularly, like to see an interaction with an ex-boyfriend and a really hot new girl would
mm.
hurt me. It would hurt my body. Um, so yeah, it's got a profound impact on our bodies and our brains. I'm not sure if that was a really thick thing to say, that last bit, but yeah.
No, I'm like it's why this why it really why reading your book was really important because I was just like yeah we're kind of talking about it cursorily, like just as a society, but 10 years down the line, this is going to be so severe. Where we've already talked about some deaths that have happened just from people gaming in internet cafes and stuff. Especially, I used to live in China, and that happened a lot. People would just die in those cafes, and it's just insane that we're still not quite completely aware of what is going on.
Mm,
There was this really good Netflix documentary on I think it was the social experiment or social something or other. And it was their own people working in these spaces said, "Yeah,
yeah,
we don't use these platforms for this reason." I was like, "Oh God." Um, no, I'm like, look, speaking, I guess from experience, isn't it? You can say this
mm,
because again, I think the thing is, it's one of those things where it's not like alcohol or cigarettes where everyone's turning around going, you shouldn't be doing that. We've got
yeah,
a tax on it. We're not going to let you have this. It's just one of those things where it's like completely acceptable part of people's diet. Um,
yeah,
and that's why it's so worrying. And that's why we need people like you who've been through this to talk about it because otherwise we don't really know what's going on to people like in
yeah.
people's brains. So thanks, Harriet, for sharing your harrowing story because it is harrowing at times, and there is a reason for it, a very very clear reason for it. So I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing your book with the
Oh,
world.
thank
So
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been so lovely talking to you.